Tipu Sultan. You hear that name in India, and it's complicated. For some, he's the Tiger of Mysore, India's very first freedom fighter. But for others, he's a religious fanatic, a brutal tyrant. So how can one man, an 18th century ruler, stir up such fierce loyalty and, at the same time, such deep-seated hatred, even centuries after he's gone? This quote from our source material really just nails it. It perfectly captures the two completely opposite views of the same man. On one side, you have the heroic resistance leader. On the other, a reviled persecutor. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the history behind both of these powerful images and see if we can make sense of it.
And this isn't just some old academic debate. Not at all. In just the last few years, government plans to celebrate his birthday have led to massive protests, to political showdowns. And that brings up the real question, right? Why does a man who died way back in 1799 still feel so present, so controversial in the India of today? That's the mystery we're going to try to unravel.
All right, so first, let's look at the image of Tipu that has inspired so many people, the anti-colonial warrior. You have to understand, to the British East India Company, he wasn't just another local king. Oh no, he was their biggest, toughest, and most dangerous problem.
And if you want to understand Tipu's mindset, you got to hear about this thing they found. After he was killed, the British were going through his palace and they found this life-sized mechanical toy of a tiger mauling a British soldier. You could even turn a crank and it would growl and the soldier would shriek. This tells you everything. For him, this fight was deeply, deeply personal.
And that personal hatred, well, it defined his entire life. This timeline shows you it wasn't just one war. It was a relentless four-part struggle against British expansion that went on for decades. Tipu basically inherited this war from his father, and he fought it with a ferocity that absolutely stunned the British, right up to the very end, when he died fighting in the streets of his own capital. And here's why the British saw him as such a massive threat. Tipu wasn't just a tough warrior, he was an innovator, a modernizer. He pioneered the military use of iron-cased rockets. We're talking mass attacks that absolutely terrified the British soldiers. He built a navy, he sent diplomats to try and form an anti-British alliance with Napoleon and France. He even tried to beat the Europeans at their own game with a state-run trading company. The man was way ahead of his time. But there's another side to this story, a much, much darker one. See, while he was fighting the British, he was also building his own kingdom. And the historical record, including his own letters, tells a really brutal story about how he did it. The accusations against him are really severe, and they're specific. We're talking about campaigns that involved forced conversions and deportations of entire communities, like the Kodavas of Coorg and the Christians of Kanara. We see the destruction of temples and churches in the lands he conquered, and in his own writings, he justifies these things as punishment for rebellion or as part of a holy war to build his God-given kingdom.
And to get a sense of the scale of all this, just think about this number, over 60,000. According to historical accounts, that's roughly how many Kannar Christians were captured in Mangalore back in 1784 and forced to march hundreds of miles back to his capital city. And then there's this number, 70,000. This is the estimated number of Kodavas from Coorg who, according to some historians, were deported and then forcibly converted to Islam during Tipu's campaigns to crush their rebellion. So, how on earth do we reconcile these two figures, the forward-thinking anti-colonial hero on one hand and the absolutely ruthless persecutor on the other? Was he just a hypocrite? Well, the key might be to stop seeing them as contradictions and start seeing them as different tools he used for the very same purpose: building and holding on to power. I mean, you can't get much clearer than this. This is a direct quote from one of Tipu's own letters to his commander. It shows that for him, forced conversion wasn't just a byproduct of war. It was an ordered, strategic part of it. It's chilling. He even orders that the dead are to be converted. Okay, but at the very same time he's ordering things like that, you have this. 30. That's how many warm, respectful letters were exchanged between Tipu Sultan and the head priest of the Sringeri Mutt, one of the most important and revered Hindu monasteries in all of India. And this right here is the great paradox of Tipu Sultan. In 1791, when a rival army plundered that Hindu temple, Tipu didn't celebrate. No, he wrote letters saying how pained he was, he sent state funds to help restore it, and then he asked the head priest to pray for the success of his kingdom. So what's going on? Well, it seems he destroyed temples that were centers of political opposition, but he actively protected and supported one that was loyal to him.
So this might be the closest we can get to making sense of him. Tipu Sultan was a product of his time, a brilliant, ambitious, and ruthless 18th century king. For him, religion was just another tool in the toolbox. He'd use persecution to crush rebels, and he'd use patronage to secure the loyalty of powerful allies. It wasn't about modern ideas of secularism or fanaticism, it was about power, period.
So how did this really complex figure get turned into this simple hero versus villain story we argue about today? Well, it happened in stages. First, after the British killed him, they needed to justify their conquest, so they painted him as this evil, fanatical tyrant. Then, fast forward to the 20th century, Indian nationalists needed anti-colonial heroes, so they reclaimed him, focusing only on his fight with the British and kind of ignoring the other stuff. And today, those two simplified stories are what keep clashing in the political arena. And that leaves us with a really difficult question in the end. Tipu Sultan's story shows us that history is almost never a simple story of good guys versus bad guys. The past is full of people who were visionary and brutal, sometimes in the same breath. So maybe the challenge for us isn't to pick a side. Maybe it's have the courage to face the uncomfortable, complicated truth of the past, warts and all.